So on this line of code, what I want to make sure we're clear about is this hashtag include says bring in some other code. This could be code that you wrote, could be code that somebody else wrote. And so we're going to see a few of them here, and I want to make sure that we understand what these are doing. This one STD stands for standard. The IO stands for input and output. So I'll throw this into our shared notes, which you have access to. So STD is standard, and IO is input output. This is a better way for you to get information in from the keyboard and out to the screen in C++ than some examples you're going to see, and we've used a couple of them, use IO stream. So the IO stream does input and output. It also lets you pipe like a bunch of data entry into a program. It lets you take the output and redirect it to a printer. It does a number of things. It's kind of a multi-purpose utility for moving things in and out of a device. But it doesn't have near the accuracy in terms of controlling the input and output format. And when you first start learning C++, it's tempting to use IOStream, but it's not the professional way, and you outgrow it pretty quickly. So I move you very quickly into using the standard input-output library. Now the next one is what do you think the STD stands for? And you could just type it in public chat. Hint, it's the same as the one above it. It's a standard. LIB. Anyone want to guess what LIB stands for? Standard library. So the standard library that we're bringing in will allow us to do things like create a random number. Now there's a concept here I want to talk about, and that is what, yes, Hayden did ask. There's actually probably no, online GDB is somewhat limited. It's only an 8-bit world that we're working in. So you don't want to include more than you need. And the size of your program is going to include, depending on how you set it up, anything you link in. So you, generally speaking, want to make a smaller program more efficient and not include extra. Because if you did basically hashtag include the world, some people couldn't bring that on and run it on their system. Because it could be a phone or a satellite or a smart TV that you're developing in C++ for. So smaller, it's going to work on more machines. So I'm going to open up or just do a new one. All right, so let's think of an example. When you're playing a game, not an electronic game, where you might have a random event happen. Give me an example of a game where you might actually have a random event happen. What happens in D&D that ends up being somewhat random? Roll a d20. I'm not going to be able to draw out a d20. Sorry. I'm going to have a hard time doing a d6. For those who are not familiar with D&D, it stands for Dungeons and Dragons. Is anybody out there a DM? Because I don't want to misspeak here. So we might have a dice we're going to roll. And so a random roll of a dice is supposed to be a random event. How about any other games? Anybody ever play one of those games where you have a little spinner that you flick, and it might be colors, or it might be, for some reason I just remember there was like a toy you would pull a cord and it would go around and it would play the sound of a cow or whatever. It would do different animal noises. But I've seen ones where you flick it and it spins around a center point and it might stop at a color or it might start at a number. So it's a little cardboard wheel that you flick and it spins around and it will stop somewhere. So those are both examples in the real world of all right, so we do have at least one DM out there. That's cool. So these random number generators, and the thing is, if you knew what the random numbers were going to be all the time, they're not really random. So the term we have is pseudo-random, which is basically a kind of random. So when I include a random number generator, it's called a pseudo-random, and you're going to get the same list every time. And if you get the same list every time for random, eventually people are going to pick up on the pattern. And that's why a lot of arcade games like Pac-Man, people could come up with a pattern because it follows that pattern every time. So the random number was pseudo-random. Now to get a true random, and this is very important for a place like Vegas, where the house has to pick odds where they're going to make money. But they also want it to be a truer random. There's a lot of science and math to gambling machines. In fact, the number one employer for games programming in Lake County is a company that makes gambling machines. And you got to be 18 just to walk in the door because it's regulated by the state. They used to make pinball machines as well, but now they're pretty much focused on making gambling machines, video poker, and things like that. So a true random, a couple ways to do it, can use time as a seed. And what that means is it's going to be based on the exact time on the machine down to the microseconds. And so it's pretty much impossible for us to hit it exactly the same in microseconds every time. And it's going to use that seed to generate what a random number is based on that time event. That's what was in the sample that you looked at in the assignment or didn't pay attention to. So stdlib will give you the ability to, I should probably document these here, which I can do, I think. Can I document here? I don't know if I can't edit the source code here. Interesting. So when you send me a program, I can't edit the source code. You wasted your time. Let's go ahead and run this for a second. So this one is doing a random number called rando, and it's using 100 here. Now the sample I put out, some people used it, had 150. We'll get to that in a minute. 100 is the proper way to do it. So down below in the input area, it says guess for a number between 1 to 100. Does anybody have a process that they use? Because you're either going to get it right, higher, or lower. Someone said 50. Then increment by 25. So what that's doing is it's taking the whole set of possibilities and it finds a midway point. It's either going to be accurate or high and low. Now, if I said I'm thinking of a number, and we did this a couple days ago, people guessed 42 and they got it right because it was thinking of a number. It wasn't random. So if I try 50, I know it's higher. So now if I divide that range above 50 to 100, I could go, let's say, 76. So now I know it's above 76 and 100 or less. So you know what? I don't want to look like a fool. So I'm going to go 100 minus 76, 24. So we divide that in half. I should have known that, plus 12. So 76 and 12 would be 88. So let's go for 88. So it's lower than 88. So now I know it's between 76 and 88. And so this process of elimination, and this is in the way now, which is unfortunate. So anyone want to say what should I do between 76 and 88? I can keep using my calculator here. 80, 82, sure, let's try 80. Let's go 80. 80. So now we're between 80 and 88. Let's go 84. Now what this didn't tell me is it didn't tell me how many guesses I made. Some people included that functionality and it was in the sample code. And this is something that's got a loop in it. And so by looping, instead of actually just having the if statement once, allows it to repeat and interact with the player. Now we could make some of this a little bit different and make it more interesting. And even if you don't have this example working, and you're not asking specific questions, I can ask you questions about it. Now to play with this, it turns out I'm going to need to select it all and do a copy. And then I can just come in here and I can do fork this, which sounds like a bad word, right? But fork this really means I want to take it from a development branch and I want to make my own version of it. This is a term you're going to see a lot in the Unreal world. And if you do a fork and then later you want to reintroduce it, that's how you bring a change into a larger system. So I've never tried this before. I'm going to try to fork it, which I don't even know if it's done anything here. So I'm going to open up the lightning bolt there and see if I'm in a new version. There we go. So I've now got my own version when I clicked for a second. So now I should be able to start to update this. And so the first thing I wanted to do to model it properly is put your name in there and the date and what it does. So I want to show you how to do random, and I wanted to start by saying you can use this for input and output, or you could have this one for input output, and you don't need them both, you just need one or the other. Now this person is perhaps using both. See if they have any C-ins or C-outs in there. They do have C-in, and they do have printf. So with the code, they need to have both of them there. If they wanted to make it smaller, they could change this to be a scan F, and they would say in the format of number. It needs to be in quotes as I think about it. And then in that location, we want to put this where guess is. We're going to end in a semicolon. So I've updated that line of code. There's the old stuff I don't need anymore. And now I've got printf and scanf. I no longer need cin, and I can get rid of 2 lines of code up here. I don't need these 2 lines of code. This one and this one are no longer needed. That makes my program smaller and more efficient because I'm not including the library, and I don't need this line to tell it how to handle these commands in a shorter format. So there's 3 different loop types in C++. What type of loop is this using? Please type into chat what type you think it is. So I got 2 responses. Let me bring this up as a poll. I'm not saying they were right or wrong, but the 3 types would be and I'm going to put up, now it's important that you know why. So I'm going to put up, I don't know or I don't know why. Now nobody sees your individual replies, including me. I just see that there's a summary that shows up. So is it a while loop, a do loop, or is it a for loop? And I want you to understand the reason why. Okay, I got 1 person that has not responded to the question. You can't hear me. All right, I'll type it into a public chat. All right, so survey or poll, it's called a poll. Poll is what kind of a loop is in the sample. All right, I'm going to go back to polling. I got a response from everybody, and I'm going to publish them. So most people recognize it's a do loop, and some people didn't know why. And 1 person answered the other one. Bless you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. So this is, if the person who wasn't sure, now the word while is on the screen. So I can see where someone would have gone, okay, it's a while loop. The combination of the word do plus the word while is actually called a do loop or a do while loop. And if I haven't pointed these out before, this little drop down triangle lets you collapse it. And if you were to collapse the stuff in the middle, it'll kind of show you the do while is the combination of the control structure. The difference between a do while is it's going to do it once no matter what versus a while, which would check the condition first. Now, this programmer did not put a value into guess. They declared it, said it's of type integer, it's called guess, but they didn't put a value in. Stylistically, if you put in something like assign a value, such as a number that's not 1 to 100, I mean, you could put 200 in there. You could put 0 in there. If I put that value in there, then I can change this from a do while to a while loop. Now, this is a little bit weird. I'm going to drag this line from here and put it where the word do was. I'm going to make this a comment, but I also don't want the comment, the semicolon there. So do it this way. So the first one is from when it was a do while loop, and the second one was the word do. I can change this code and it will work the same way. So it could have been done with a while loop, and some people used a while loop, some people used a do while loop. Before I do anything else, I just want to run this and show you that it will work without IO stream, and it will work as a while loop. And this is one of the ways that you'll start to see people could have done this, solve this problem more than one way. Let's just try 84, just because, Wow, look at that. I guessed it the first time. Why is it that a random number came up to be the exact same number again? That surprise anybody? Let's take a look at what's going on in the code here. We're setting a value here using random, but we don't actually have anything that's using the time to set a true random number. Even though the include statement here includes time, which is another header file. So there's something that's not quite right about this code to give you a truly random number. Let's take a look at the assignment and see if there was a clue that might have been helpful for this person to figure this out. So if we look at the instructions, it says only if totally stuck. And notice I called it imperfect. And this is like when you do a search on the internet. You might find something close but not exact. For example, this line here, include precompiled header, is not going to help you at all in online GDB. This is using cout and cin. It's using a while number, or while. And the thing is, this is using 150. So if somebody coded it and they used 150 and they didn't understand why 150 was there, then, and the assignment was for a range of from 1 to 100, they were probably coming up with numbers that were over 100. And the reason why is this sets the range. This line of code here basically says, divide whatever number comes out of it by 150 and give me the remainder, which is going to give you anything from a 0 to 149. Computers, you could think of them as though they start counting at 0, and so the 149th number is the 150th value. And so this plus 1 moves your range from 0 to 149 to 1 to 150 in this example. So that was a sample that could have gotten you really close if you needed to, if you were stuck, if you had no idea how to finish it. But it was imperfect. And that's how it's going to be when you look on the internet. It's not going to be exactly the answer. Now, I also included a link to this thing, which it talks about a random number. And so here's some examples. And if you look here, you'll notice that you're going to get a value in the range, if you use 100, from 0 to 99, which is kind of what I was talking about there. You'll notice that they show it to you with a plus 1 to give you the range from 1 to 100. So that additional resource gave you information on how to adjust it from the 150 to 100 and to get the values from 1 to 100. And this one is showing you how to get a range that was at least a particular value, which could be, for example, you want to test dates of birth dates or something like that. So it's it's got multiple applications right there. So this is also noteworthy, is that it does make lower numbers slightly more likely. So it's not truly random. And I'm scrolling down here. Now, this is something that you could have actually copied and pasted from here. And if you do this and you understand the code, cite the source. But we're just learning. I would expect that you probably don't want to just grab the code. You'd want to play with it a little bit. And this is going to basically use something in here that has one line of code that was not included. See this line here? It says srand with time and passes in null. If I copy this one line of code and I put it in the program before I come up with my random number, this is going to seed the random number so that I'll get a true random number. So by adding that one line of code and running it, odds are really low it's going to be 84 again. I should have guessed higher. So interestingly, by going with 84 and knowing it's higher, it's not 84. That was what I was after. And so I could just go with 94. Or so it's in that range there, so 90. So I got it in 3 guesses, which is pretty good. I think mathematically there's something like 7 guesses in a range of 1 to 100. You should be able to get it every time in 7 or less, something like that, as long as you're paying attention to the clues. Now, another thing that I think is helpful, because you can return any number at the end, is you could return a value here that actually was the random number. So if I did a return rando, and I ran the same program, that's a variable name now, and if I run it, it's not going to return a 0. It's going to return whatever number it was in that range. Now, I'm going to unfortunately need to guess the number again. So 15 higher. You see my input area, so I think I might have guessed the same number. There we go. So now you'll notice the exit code here is 19. So now my return statement is a little more meaningful than just a 0. And as a programmer, you can decide to do that. You can return a value that doesn't have to be 0 to demonstrate a better use of the return statement. If this was a function that would come up with your random number, you could return that random number from a function. Main is a function. It returns a value. You can build your own functions that return values as well. So this was a simple idea in terms of the complexity of games we're going to be coding, but it does have the elements of randomness, not really skill, but luck, and therefore it's game-like. So if you don't have a true random number in there, and if you want to make it a better version, I would encourage you to do this process, include that line of code, and get a true random number. And then come up with some kind of a storyline that makes it more interesting. Like you're trying to break into somebody's combination lock because you forgot your gym combination lock. How hard would it be to make this so that you're asking somebody for 3 numbers? And they have to actually guess the code. How complicated would that become if you had it in the range, let's say, I don't know what a combination lock goes up to. Been a while since I had a gym lock, or I don't know, 30 or something like that. So if you change the range to 30, simple as that, and then you could actually have 3 different random numbers. By the way, if you wanted to do roll of a dice, change that to 6. This would be a lot easier to run. Because you got basically, now I didn't change the comment, that's not going to happen automatically, but if I just start with 3, and I go 5, 4 is it? So what if you don't want to have them guess, and you just want to print out a whole series of numbers? What if I moved this random number generator inside of the loop? I'm not going to say int because I don't want it to basically Well, rando is not equal to guess, and guess equals. Let's see. Let's run this until now. If I'm kind of flipping this around, I'm going to have the random try to match whatever number. Let's see how long it's going to take me to reach the number 42 if I put this in a range of 100. Now I need to know how many times I went through it, or else I have to count all the numbers. So let me try this once first. Oh, it's still waiting for me to guess. All right, I need to break this because I don't really want to stop and ask them. I'm not going to ask them for a number, and I'm not going to bring it in. What I'm doing is I'm getting a random number, and I'm trying to match it to 42. Okay, so this is actually going to have the computer try to guess 42, and we'll see how long that takes. So it guessed that many times. I don't know what numbers it was guessing because I didn't include it in the print. I also don't know how many guesses, but I could change the program so that it does those things. If I want to count how many times I'm in the loop, I could either include another variable as a counter. Let's say someone give me a name of a variable to count how many times there was a guess. Variable name, something that doesn't have spaces, something that makes sense to count the number of times. Okay, so here's an aside, a personal story. Pause the